Hello, this is Dr. Jessica Ash. Today, I have the great honor of interviewing Bird Mejia, and we are going to talk about fostering emotional health. So just hang on. So without further ado, I would like to bring Bird onto the stage. Thank you so much for being with us.
It is an honor. Oh my goodness, I'm so pleased to be here. And those that are joining us, it's not an accident that you popped in and you watched this. So there's some medicine here for you. So I'm so happy to connect with you.
So can you tell me a little bit about your background?
Yes. Well, as far as my training, I have a couple master's degree. One of them almost was as a psychotherapist. And I was ready to finish it up. I was finishing up my training and something didn't feel right. And I was in my practicum and the counselor that had been training me, she did something that didn't settle right in my stomach. And I was like, this is not the right way. I realized some of my classmates were really unhealthy and I'm like, this is not the right way. So I went along my life. And then I realized that I was in a really toxic marriage, really unhappy. I realized that I had not been in joy all my life. And I started digging in deep. I started a healing process. And in that healing process, I've been trained in lots of different things. I'm a Shakti Nam yogi, which is like Kundalini yoga. So it's a lot of breath work, a lot of mantra, sound meditation. And then I've been trained in Reiki and harmonium healing, shamanic energy medicine, chakra energy healing. So all these things, because I was healing my own self. And in that process, I was called to assist others with their healing. And in that process, my mother also died. And when she died, she was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, yes, about 1.5 years ago. And no history of any kind of cancer in her family ever. We thought she was in perfect health. And then she died 35 days later. It went that quickly. But when she was dying, I realized she started telling me stories. And then my father afterwards started telling me stories about my grandfather and the relationship that my grandfather had with my grandmother. Really toxic, emotionally abusive, physically abusive, all these things. And I realized I basically repeated the same pattern as my grandfather. And then I started doing the studies and with my shamanic work. And I'm realizing that a lot of us are repeating patterns that I thought the roots were in childhood wounds, but what I realized that it was my mother's stuff, my grandmother's stuff. And I think for many of us, it's centuries long traumas, because when a trauma happens to you, a lot of times you don't process it until you're ready. But if it's so horrific and in the past, our ancestors, especially the females in our lineage, went through things that were unspeakable, it was too traumatic and the trauma gets passed on. And all the epigenetics is proving this. The scientists are proving this. So I am so passionate about assisting others to heal themselves, because when you heal yourself, you break these chains. You don't get to watch your children repeat the same patterns. You don't get to die like my mother with all the emotional pain, because what happens is if the body stores the pain, everything's connected. If we don't heal it, it's going to eventually show up in our body. And that's not so much fun.
Have you read the book, The Body Keeps the Score?
I have not. That sounds amazing.
Yeah, you'll love it. So I also have been on a journey and overcoming my own past and breaking those toxic chains. And one topic, yeah, thank you. One topic in there is, what if we could prevent them? And I was in contact, I recently shared a video on my station about Dr. Curzon, who was the doctor for the Dalai Lama. And he said, if you're in a classroom, assuming you had a physical classroom, but it doesn't have to be a physical classroom anymore, and there's a 6-year-old who's acting up, you have a big picture of every emotion, like happy, sad, whatever, and have the kid 6-year-old just point to the emotion. And then you can affirm that and say, okay, so you're feeling angry right now. Let's talk about why. Let's talk about how you can move on from that. And my point is that emotional awareness, we don't have to call it like mental health. Like, it doesn't have to be about psychiatrists. What if we could teach emotional health starting from an early age?
Yes. I absolutely agree. And I think this is a shift that the little ones are actually calling us to help them with. I work and my young one has helped me, but you hear so many stories of 2 and 3-year-olds that are actually helping their parents deal with their own emotions and like that's what they're calling for. That's what they wanting us to do. But a lot of times as adults, we've never been raised that way. We have just shoved away our emotions, shoved away our emotions, shoved away our emotions. And that's why as we get older, it shows up in disease, and it's going to show up in mental health. It's got to go someplace, right? I think back in the day, you always heard of the woman that went crazy in the insane asylum. Well, I would look at that when I see those stories, back in the day. I'm like, that woman was gifted, and she was intuitive, and she had psychic skills, and she was an empath, and the world wasn't allowing her to step into that.
Yes, and I would love for every human to just be aware of where their emotions are. Like you said, we just are so used to shoving them. How are you? I'm fine. How are you? I'm fine. And there is a time and a place, if you're in a big gathering or something, where you kind of have to focus on that moment and put your best self forward. But there are times in every person's day when we can process whatever emotions are going on.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to say that you're a beacon for emotional awareness, and it's okay to have emotions.
Yes.
Do you have any ideas? Do you have practical tips on how people can process negative emotion?
Well, the first thing is like, just allow yourself to feel them. A lot of times we don't even allow ourselves to feel them. We like, I've got grief coming up. Let me just shove that down. I've got anger coming out. Like, that's a bad emotion. I can't feel it. You have to feel the emotion. And when you're going through, you can do something where you are just watching it. You can just be and say, I am me. And this I is watching this anger move through. And just be aware and just watch. Just watch. And don't have any judgment about it. Don't be like, I'm bad because I have this anger. I'm bad because I have this depression, or I shouldn't. Why am I feeling depressed again? Just sit and watch and be present and allow yourself to feel it. So this is what happens. Most of us drive, right? When we're driving and the light goes on, the oil light or the engine light goes on, what do?
We get stressed.
Yes, we get stressed, but do we continue driving, or we try to go to the nearest place to get it checked out?
That's a very great metaphor.
So we go, yes, because if we continue driving that car, when the warning light comes on, our engine's going to explode probably, right? Like, something's going to happen. It's going to show up in our car, and it's going to be much more costly. It's the same thing with us. When we're driving along, we're going along, and emotion rises up. It's telling us something. It wants us, like, look at this, look at this, look at this. And then we just don't do it. And then we're surprised when it shows up as cancer. It shows up as, an emotional outburst, or it shows up as mental health. Like, yes, it's going to show up if you don't process through the emotions. And this is, the second chakra. This is the stuff, and this is like the base foundation. Emotions, and if we don't process emotions, they're going to show up as addictions. And addictions, can look like lots of things. A lot of times we just think addictions, we think, sex and drugs and alcohol, but addictions to drama. I was addicted to drama. That's why being in a toxic relationship was okay, because that's what was raised with drama. So I was addicted to the drama. There's an adrenaline rush when you do that whole cycle. You can be addicted to working too much. You can be addicted to doing. Those are all forms of addictions. And a lot of times it's about not sitting still. If we're always going all the time, we don't have time to sit and process. But those emotions, just like when you're in the car, they're telling you to look at this emotion, to feel it. And a lot of times when you feel that emotion, like, for example, if it's grief, like when my mother passed, the grief came and I had to allow just the grief to wave through me, to process through. When I was in a narcissistic relationship and I was processing afterwards, there was a time when I was driving in my car and this anger just wailed up. And I didn't, normally I was a person that was like, oh, I'm really loving. I love him no matter what. I forgive him. I had all this stuff. And this anger came up. And so the car was a safe place for me. So I had to be in the car just saying, F you, and Dr. Christiane Northrup talks about that there's power, and they've done studies on it, the power of the F-bomb, right? I was like, how can you do this to me? F you. And I was in the car screaming and yelling and getting some of that emotion out. But getting that anger out allowed me to move past into, then I could go, after the anger came through, then I had to grieve that I loved a man. I centered my life around a man that did not have the ability to truly love me. I had to grieve that I didn't even have it wasn't like we had this beautiful relationship and then it changed and we went our other ways. He never had the capacity to love. So I had to grieve this stuff. I had to grieve also, now being a single mother with no support. I had to grieve all these things, but I couldn't get to the grieving unless I did the anger. And then I'm doing the grieving and I'm going through the grieving. And then I get to the next stage, and finally I'm able to get to the stage where there can be compassion, there can be forgiveness, which frees me so that I'm not attached with the cord. Because if you're attached with the cord and you got all this anger sitting in there, you're going to keep attracting this in your energy field. You're going to keep attracting the same thing. And then if you choose never to have a relationship, but the energy field is around you, because, scientists have proven that we're energetic beings and diseases are caught because of the belief systems. It's the energy field that the children download and you carry with you. If you choose, like, I'm not going to ever be in another relationship because I'm not going to repeat this, but you haven't healed and you haven't gone through those emotions and released them and let them, well, your children are going to absorb that. And then you're going to get to watch your children repeat the same patterns. And then your grandchildren repeat the same patterns. So the number one thing to mental health, to healing, is first just being aware and allowing yourself. It's like the best self-care. Allow yourself to cry if you need to cry. And if you're a man watching this, you get to cry. You get to feel these emotions, And, for some of us, like for me, I thought, I'm being weak if I cry. I'm being weak if I do this. No, you don't want to do it right in front of, you don't want to get on Facebook and then just like be with everybody or do it. There's safe places to do it, and if it ends up you are in a public place and it comes out, just allow, because perhaps there was healing. Perhaps you being emotional in a space that you're like, this wasn't ideal. Maybe you being emotional and allowing your emotions gave another person permission to do the same.
I am so glad you brought up grief. We'll talk about Mohan's great comment in a minute. But I wanted to say, I have a friend who's grieving right now, and he was writing a poem about trying to make grief shorter. And I have to say, it takes a lot of courage to feel that pain of grief, because I've been through it, and I call it the gift that keeps on giving, because my mom died in my arms when I was 16. And like, so and it was so much pain. Like, people don't want to feel that pain. I mean, some of it is about, certainly I think it's harder for men to feel like they're allowed to have sadness, but I mean, it's very real pain that you go through. And I laugh at myself now, but like when my daughter graduated from high school, I had to cry. When my son graduated from high school, I had to cry. And like, it's the gift that keeps on giving. But I want to give hope to people who do have grief, that if you permit yourself to feel that grief, you can get through it to the other side. But if you lock it down and pretend that you're not going to feel it, well, that's not going to help you. You have to let it flow through you so you can get through it. Yeah.
Yes. And I think sometimes people feel like I can't feel, it feels like this darkness, like you're not going to ever get through. But it's
Oh,
kind
yeah.
of, and you have to remember that if you look at this analogy, that you are like the sky, right? You're the sky. And sometimes storms move through, and sometimes those storms are really challenging, really big storms. Well, the storms have to move through in order to move back out. And then the sun will eventually appear. But
Yeah.
you have to go through these periods, you have to go through kind of like the dark tunnel to get to the light to the other side. And there is such light. I mean, that's the thing, that even the whole healing process, so many people, I think, are afraid of this process, thinking, oh my God, it's going to hurt too much. Well, yes, but it hurts more not to go through it. It hurts
Yes.
more. It hurts more to manifest as a disease. It hurts more not to feel true love and true joy. It hurts more to wake up and watch your children repeat in the same pattern. And it hurts more to die knowing that I didn't repeat, like, I didn't change this. That's really, I watched my mother die that way. She died with all that anger still in her.
Yeah.
That's what hurts, right? And so you feel the grief. And like, I'm going to do an example of my mother. So I think a lot of us, a lot of our mothers have wounds because we have lived in this patriarchal system for centuries, which has decimated the woman, the in so many ways. And so a lot of our generations of women are still healing from different things. So because of that trauma that's gotten passed on, a lot of us are raised by mothers. Or if it wasn't your mother, it might have been her mother, grandmother that had trauma. So because of that, there's a lot of mothers that were not able to love completely because of the trauma. They're still healing that stuff. So for me, that was my story. My mother, she had a lot of trauma, a lot of different things that she was dealing with. And she was not able to love me the way I needed her to love me. And a month before she was diagnosed, I thought I had done all the healing on my mom. I'd been doing this mother stuff, writing poems since I was 16, doing all this stuff, that it was done. And I kept getting the spiritual message over and over: heal the family wounds, heal the mother wound. I'm like, what do you mean? What do you mean, Spirit? What do you mean, God? I've already done all this. Why do I have to, I'm like, it's done. But no, what I realized, I sat on my bed one day and I started writing, and I had to write down that my mother did not love and support me the way I needed her. And likely because she did not love herself, and she did not know how to love herself, and she loved the best way she knew how to, but likely she would never, ever be able to give me what I needed. And I remember just bawling on my bed, like the grief just waved through me. And I just was like, just literally curled up, bawling, because that's something I realized I always wanted. And it impacted relationship, impacted almost everything in my life, that foundation, because a mother's the foundation. But then when she was diagnosed with cancer a month later and she was dying, and the last time I saw her, my mother was shooting some venom at me. But for the first time in my life, I was able to be in that space and say, you know what? I've grieved this. I can love you unconditionally. I know that you can't give me what I need, and I have chosen to give that to myself. So on my mother's last days, I was able to give her just unconditional love. And that was healing for my mother, and it was healing for me. And that was something that helped break the change in the lineages. And I tell you, when my mother passed, my sisters kept on telling me, she's going to be careful about it because she's aged 20 years in 2 weeks. You're going to be just, after she passed, her face, she actually looked younger than I had seen her in 20 years. It was like as her spirit was leaving her body. And it was because I think when she was dying, she finally had that unconditional love. And, it wasn't just me giving it was the family giving that to her, but it was really powerful. And I wouldn't have gotten through that if I hadn't allowed myself just to feel. And it was uncomfortable and it hurt, but it got me through some light.
Yes. I love your analogy of the storm, and it goes through. And So we've given hope to people who may be reluctant to permit themselves to feel grief. But there's one other component here that I think is really relevant. And that is when you start to become aware of your emotions. The analogy I often hear is an emotion can be like a cloud in the sky passing overhead, similar to any storm.
Yeah.
And you can choose to engage with it, or you can just let it pass. And awareness doesn't mean that if you're angry, you're supposed to go out and hit someone. Or awareness doesn't mean that if you're angry, you're supposed to hold on to that anger. The idea, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about the difference between an emotion of happiness and well-being.
Well, an emotion of happiness. So I think happiness for me is different than joy. Joy is something, happiness for me is like you're in this kind of elevated state of being happy and blah, blah, blah. And then it can come down, right? It's kind of like that roller coaster. For me, like joy is you can live joyfully through the sorrows of life. So, the emotions can escalate like this, but well-being is that no matter what emotions are waving through you and whatever's coming back and forth, you're okay. Like you have a foundation. It's like, you know, you're the sky. It's really honestly like, I know I'm the sky and I can sit and watch the ecstasy come and then the, kind of is going to come down. Like you watch these emotions, the anger come through, the depression come through. Like, it's like Rumi talked about, what's coming at my door today, maybe it's a sorrow today at my door, maybe it is an anger, maybe it's a sadness that's at my door, but I allow it to come in so that it can clear myself out. Yeah. But at the same time, your well-being, you can have well-being in that, knowing that, that you're not getting swayed. The anger can come and you're not just letting it just like, it's like you're, I would say well-being is like being a tree, an ancient tree with beautiful roots. So no matter what storms come, you're going to sway, or you're going to do this, but it's not going to ever pull you down because you are rooted. And if you think about it, any of you have studied the chakras. The chakra is the first chakra. And this is why chakras are they're so amazing. Like before I knew chakras, I didn't understand. I thought it was just this yogi stuff, but the chakras are actually related to all the different diseases and the different things that happen spiritually, emotionally, and physically. So your root chakra, this is the base of your spine. This is the color red. This is the foundation. And if your root chakra, and this is where you feel safe in the world, where you feel loved in the world, this is like where you feel safe in money. Do you feel safe making money doing what you love to do? So if you're working a job you hate, and the money is fine, your root chakra is impacted. If you didn't feel safe, if you had a parent that, didn't make you feel safe and loved, you have a root chakra thing. If you don't feel for whatever reason, if you don't feel safe, if you have anxiety, it's showing up. But it shows up, it affects your back. So like lower back is money issues. Upper back is not feeling supported. If you don't feel supported in the world, you don't feel safe, right? It affects your blood. So things like leukemia are root chakra issues. It affects your immunity. So every time you're getting sick, your immunity, it's because for some way or another, you didn't feel safe. So like this is huge for COVID, right? Even with right now that's going on. The safety, it affects your skin. So think about teenagers. What happens to them as they're teenagers? They get all this acne. Well, it's because they're in the space where they don't feel safe and they don't feel comfortable just being who they are. They're feeling judged, and that's all these things it impacts. So it's the root. Having a strong root, feeling safe, is part of being well-being, that no matter what happens, you are founded, you are rooted. And life is going to bring storms, but you are that ancient tree with the roots, and that's well-being.
Thank you. That's a great metaphor. The way I had thought about it in previous times was, if you pay attention to every single emotion, it's like riding a bunch of waves.
Yes.
You don't have to pay attention and ride every wave. But it's also more about, I think well-being is like the trajectory of your emotions. Well, if you get sad, but you're moving to a better place, okay. So think about your emotions long term, not every single one that comes into your day. Like, I have to feel sad now. I have to feel, whatever. You can just let them go sometimes.
Yes.
One other aspect, we were talking about being addicted to trauma or drama, and I was listening to Deepak talk about the pendulum, our norm, and if we're used to drama and we're used to a wide pendulum swing, we naturally kind of recreate that. And I'm so embarrassed that I did this, but it reminds me of what you're talking about with drama. When COVID early on, I was so ramped up, and I could feel that pendulum getting bigger and bigger. And I became a victim of this fraud scam that kind of built off of that pendulum swing. And so I'm just embarrassed that I did that, but it's because going back to that pendulum swing. Now, mostly my pendulum is like this now. I've worked very hard to get rid of the drama and to be at peace with everything that goes on. But like when COVID hit, it just wham right back to that norm, and it takes me practice to step off of the pendulum.
Yes, that's powerful. I like that. Well, so first of all, like, my sister, don't be embarrassed. Like, I think things show up in our life. Sometimes it's to teach us. And sometimes we look at it like, why is it showing up in my life? Like, why did I attract this? But sometimes it's just come into your life to teach you something, to show you, to say, hey, what is a lesson here? So whatever shows up, instead of, I think so many of us carry judgment and shame about stuff, I mean, you can even be, I think for me, like, I experienced that, even like the shame, like, why did I allow a man to treat me like this for so long? Why did I allow someone to cheat on me and stayed and begged? Like, well, the answer is deep. The answer it wasn't just me. It was like, this was a lineage of pain. And I look at it as, this came to me because I had the sacred honor and duty to heal this. And I couldn't have healed this unless I had gone through this. So sometimes when things show up, we can have judgment, say, why was I so stupid? Why did I do this? Well, look at it like, perhaps this showed up and it might have been something really ugly, really, and something that you were ashamed about. But we're all human. We are all human. We all are learning. There's none of us that are going to ever be perfect, right? We all have faults. We all have flaws. And those flaws and those imperfections are what make us beautiful. I mean, think about the person that you love most in the world, that you like, whether it's a child or a spouse, or it could have even been your first love, a parent. There's somebody, everyone just take a moment, think about that person. And think about their weaknesses and their flaws. That doesn't bother, like, that is, sometimes that's like the thing that we even love about them. They're like, they do this certain thing. You love them despite that, right?
Yeah.
But how many of us can look at ourselves in the mirror and say the same thing about ourselves? No, we have this judgment. Like, no, like, so many of us love other people unconditionally, no matter their fault and their flaws.
But not ourselves.
And not ourselves. And a lot of times the faults and the flaws are what make that person unique. What makes me unique are part of my flaws. Like, it's, I got this beautiful tapestry, and some of the cracks and this, and some of the different things, only I have my flaws. Like, they're particular, right? And that's what other people love about me, that love me unconditionally. And that's the thing that I struggle with myself. So we get to learn to to love ourselves unconditionally.
Oh, you've given me such peace with that, and letting go of our own shame is very big.
Mhm.
Uh, I'd love to have you on another day to talk more about chakras. But as we come to a close, there was one other thing I was thinking of. Oh, and that is the idea of um, emotional health. As now, the thought just flew out of my mind. I'm sorry. And it's because we got a great quote, and I'd love to show it to you. So I'll put it up there, and I'll let you engage with that.
Okay, I'm going to have to get my screen bigger here because I am on
Okay.
my phone. Good mental health starts from the way you define the joy for you. If you are too greedy, joy would take you your lifetime to get it. But it's based on very small things to make yourself joyful. Your mental health will be more likely in a good state. Yes, I agree. I think that's a beautiful.
Well, it looks like Bird may have had an internet glitch, and that's okay. We're forgiving ourselves for our flaws. Here she comes.
Back. All right. Yeah, something hopped. The Clubhouse thing popped on my phone when I was reading it, and it accidentally took me someplace else.
Yeah, I love Clubhouse.
No, I agree. Like, I think that the joy. I mean, I think if this is about like noticing the small things. The poets talk about this, right? I am also a poet, so if you think about like some of the haiku poets, they spent their entire life just looking at haiku, and haiku is not about 575 like we're talking. Haiku is about noticing two things, like, this red rose opening quietly. My heart is sad. You just noticing. And I think when you are out and about and you can just notice the little things, notice, even with yourself, notice, look in my eyes, they're sparkling. Thank you. Notice the thing about your child, right? The beautiful moments. When you walk outside and you're on a rush to be someplace, take a moment and look up into the sky and see some birds flying by, or see the breeze. Like, just those little moments when you're cooking, just take a moment and look at the onion. Look how amazing that onion is when you're cutting it, and the smell. Like, just
Beautiful.
those simple things can be joy. And a lot of times we have all this stuff that when we're in the present moment, and this is what, Eckhart Tolle talks about, the present of now. When we are in the present moment, we can notice the small things. Joy is all around us, and we can live through grief, and we can live through sadness and go through all those emotions and still live joyfully through the sorrows. And I think that is, so I love that. I think that was beautiful.
I'm certainly enjoying the present moment, and your background is so beautiful, and it brings out all of those colors. And that one thought did come back to me. You were talking about like how pain can show up as an addiction or other things. But when I was in a toxic relationship, I started getting pneumonia over and over again. And I was in and out of the hospital with pneumonia. And I think this is going to be the generation where we find the biological link between stress and our physical health. I mean, we know it causes heart attack.
Yeah.
We know it can make high blood pressure, but I really had to step out of myself and say, why are you getting pneumonia again and again and again? And then there's only one other thing in my life but there's no visible link yet there. And I think that this generation will solve and find that link.
Yes, I agree. And I love, Louise Hay has books about it. There's one called All Is Well with Dr. Mona Louise Schultz. And so she, as a medical doctor, they talk about the different chakras and how it shows up in the bodies. And you're right, because she started noticing when she was doing her work that people would come with the same issues and the same issues in the body. Yeah. So she has, kind of a whole list. And when I've looked at it for myself, like everything that I've had is on, when you have osteoporosis and the curvature of the back, it's about not being supported, in the world, and not having that support. And, for a lot of people, but a lot of women, have just done everything. They do, and ultimately don't feel supported. So all those things, yes, I totally agree with the correlation between the body
And
and the
the
mind.
part that's damaged in my lung is the part that directly touches the heart.
Yeah,
That's the
yeah.
exact part. And so
Mm,
it's not a coincidence. I
no,
think you have brought up the perfect transition because it is time for us to go. And that's about chakras. So I really hope you'll come back and be with us again and talk about chakras.
I would love to. Chakra for you, everyone, is not just foo-foo stuff. This is related to everything physically, emotionally in your life.
Well, thank you for being here with us today and taking time out of your busy schedule, Bird.
Thank you for having me. Sending you so much love and light.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
You've been listening to an interview with Bird Mejia. Thank you